Hello and welcome to COP30 Covered, the daily podcast show where we're bringing you all the latest news and views from this year's climate summit, which is happening right now in Belem, Brazil. So, will the COP organising team be able to wrap things up early? What is on the menu for delegates in Belem? And do food systems finally have a proper seat at the COP table? We answer all of these questions and more in 45 minutes or less per episode. So yes, welcome back to COP30 Covered from Edie. You're listening to the voice of Edie's content editor, Sarah, and it is currently Wednesday, the 19th of November, 2025. So I am dialing in from my house where I've had a flurry of snow this morning, and joining me on the line from our actual podcast studio is our editor, Matt Mace. Hi, Matt.
Hey, hello everyone.
Snowing over there for you too, Matt?
Yeah, it kind of like really chucked it down. It was like thick globs of snow, but it was never going to be kind of cold enough to settle. So it was that classic kind of first bit of snow where everyone gets all excited, and then 5 minutes later it wears off and people start worrying about trains, and then it'd gone. So that's a British winter summarised.
Yeah, it's been a complete whirlwind today in terms of weather. And Matt was on our news desk last night, and I understand it was a whirlwind of announcements until fairly late last night.
So we had that fun moment at all COPs where the texts come out, whether that's a initiative, the kind of final text, or something that's a bit more kind of broader in scope. And we had a kind of conveyor belt of different texts come out. The two main ones being the word that I still haven't really learned how to pronounce, the global Mataro? You can pronounce correctly, Sarah. I can't. What's it called?
I think it's Mutual, but again,
Mutual.
I'm probably butchering this, and I'm really sorry to any Portuguese speakers listening.
I think you did better than me already, so you're fine there. So you had that come out, and also some text on a just transition work program as well. And I mean, I can run through some of those key kind of, I suppose, propositions, because that's all it is right now for our listeners. And essentially the documents come out as like a 9-page draft text that essentially is meant to act as an agreement between nations on how they reference the need to respond to the climate crisis and what action can be taken. And action can range from, here's a new actual initiative with time-bound targets, to that the COP process and the nations will urge and kind of implore, which don't really translate to too much other than highlighting the need to do something. In terms of what came out, there's a few notable changes that may or may not happen. Currently, NDCs, for example, are checked every 5 years. There's a proposal right now to change that to annually, as the window to respond to the climate crisis shrinks. Those plans that are 5 years set out in advance might not be up to scratch. So that's one option that'll be looked at. Another option is a global implementation accelerator, which would be a voluntary initiative to essentially help nations implement their climate targets. On financial contributions, which has always been a sticking point, again, there's a variety of different options there. A notion that wealthy country contributions to developing countries should be tripled against the 2025 baseline. There's two dates in there, 2030 or 2035. Probably be the latter one, most likely, if it does come to fruition. Weaker options in that area, there's language around acknowledging the need to scale up finance and urging developed nations to at least triple collective provisions of finance by 2030. Fossil fuels do get a mention. The kind of probably biggest contentious moment, I think, in the last couple of years is when the phasing out of fossil fuels in, I think it was COP28, got changed to phasing down. Currently, the reference to fossil fuels in these texts are that phasing out is included, but that it is the phasing out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that do not address energy poverty or just transition. So lots of loopholes attached to that language as well. But actually, off the back of it, I think one of the most interesting things that's really emerging based off of, what happened at COP28 and this need to transition away from fossil fuels, which was the kind of language used by COP, is that we are getting calls for the implementation or the agreement of a roadmap off of fossil fuels. 80 nations have backed this, including the UK, and more than 70 kind of business coalitions, organisations representing, hundreds and thousands of businesses have also thrown their weight behind it through, well-known coalitions such as We Mean Business. They would essentially implore the COP30 presidency to most likely agree that a roadmap will be built, but that a roadmap will probably come post COP30 that would essentially draw out national and regional and global transitionings away from fossil fuels. So it would be quite a big development if it does come through, and there's enough support there to suggest it will certainly be one of the big discussions as we head into the final few days.
Yeah, lots to watch there. And there's also a roadmap going on forests, which is a little bit less known and a little bit less backed. I feel like that one's backed by about 40 countries at the last that I saw. So that's a nice continuation on yesterday's forest related theme. So obviously we'll be keeping an eye on the official text and on these roadmaps, whether those are in the official text or separately over the next couple of days. But I just wanted to flag a couple of news and brief bits for today's theme, which is largely around agriculture. So Plant Life has had a look at the COP menu and found that it's exceeded in its target of having at least 40% of the menu options for delegates being vegan or vegetarian. But as you'd expect from this kind of organisation, they're wondering why there's any beef available at all. It's pretty obvious that the answer is Brazilian economy and culture. So as of 2020, about 8.5% of Brazil's GDP was linked to the production and export of beef. So they're clearly trying to show that off here, as disingenuous as that may sound. And then also looking at the intricacies of the agriculture topic, we already knew about how many influencers from the fossil fuel industry and fossil fuel exporting nations are at the COP. 1,600, according to Kick Big Polluters Out. DSMOG has now put new data out looking at the amount of delegates that are representing industrial food and farming businesses, finding that that was about 300. So many of these delegates are there for businesses that are sponsoring either the whole COP or specific events and pavilions, including Bayer, who manufacture pesticides and other additives, and Yara, who are Europe's biggest fertilizer manufacturers. There's a lot of discourse at the moment about who's really driving the agriculture chats. Is it the big old agricultural industrial companies, or is it the farmers themselves? So that is a little flavour of today's themes and today's discussions. We're onto our first day, I should say, of thematic pairs. It feels like it's gone really quickly for me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, and I think with the kind of nature of news cycle and how it gets disseminated is that a lot of the stuff comes late in the evening at Brazil by the time that, we've filed away a lot of our stories. So even though the thematic days have that structure in, sometimes the actual news or press release or panel discussion takeaways don't emerge till a couple of days later. So it all kind of feels like it blurs into one, really.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. But if you're going by the book, the themes for today and tomorrow, that's Thursday, are largely about agriculture and food systems. There's also mention of fisheries, and the COP presidency has noted a need for equity at the roots of all of these discussions, and also is running some side tracks related to things like women and Afro descendants in agriculture. But Matt, I'm going to come to you as always for a primer on today's topic.
Yep. So I'm just looking at some stats in front of me now, and we're going to start with, lots of talk about the recent kind of ESG resiliency piece has been the need to listen to the science, and where better to start with than the IPCC. They stated in 2019 that land use accounts for around a quarter of annual global emissions, and that the biggest problem is, unsurprisingly, methane from livestock digestion. It's also stated that food production has been a driver of 75% of deforestation by area size to date. And we know that deforestation's been a big conversation of topic in Brazil because of the Amazon. We spoke about that in our last podcast. And I suppose actually for people that think that, just because that happens out in the Amazon, that doesn't really mean anything to me. And yeah, some context just to relate that back to the UK, just because, there's extreme weather and deforestation happening in Brazil. I saw this email from the ECIU from some of their stats this morning, the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, that in 2024 the UK imported almost 250 million pounds of Brazilian soy, around 60% of our total soy imports for our poultry. and that Brazil is our largest supplier of coffee as well, providing around a third of our unroasted beans. So that does have a quite a big impact in that sense. And then back to current food systems. Another outsized environmental impact is on water. Around 70% of global annual freshwater withdrawals are for agriculture. There's also soil degradation and runoffs are impacting water systems. So there is a massive problem that stems from agriculture and land use in terms of climate and biodiversity. But as is the case with our audience, ever the kind of optimists, those problems can also be flipped and looked at through solutions and value adds. So that's where we need to head to.
Yeah, I think it's that potential of agriculture as a solution that's really being spotlighted based on what we've seen. And we've seen this at previous COPs as well. It was really odd in Dubai, in that Dubai doesn't produce a lot of food outside. The UAE just doesn't have the climate for it, but there was a lot there about robotics and investment. Whereas now we're in a richly forested country whose economy and emissions footprint is really dominated by agri-food systems, which, as you mentioned, Matt, don't just feed themselves, but feed everyone else around the world, which is a segue into our special guest interview for today, which is with Manuela Santos, who is the country director for Brazil at IDH. IDH is a global sustainable trade initiative that's been running for almost 20 years now and has an extensive Brazil-specific work stream. It exists to act as a convener for multiple stakeholders in agricultural commodities to try and tackle some of those persistent and shared problems that Matt talked about in the environment, and then also social challenges as well. So in Brazil specifically, IDH works across the value chain for soy, cotton and beef across 5 regions. And in one state, Mato Grosso, it is overseeing one of the largest ever landscape-based regeneration and conservation projects in agriculture. So all of this is to say that Manuela has a deep knowledge about Brazil's food systems and who's representing them at the COP and why. So she was great to speak to, and I really hope you enjoy listening to her as much as I enjoy talking with her. Thank you so much for your time. How are you?
You're welcome, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation.
No, thank you very much for taking the time. I think I understand that you're in Sao Paolo at the moment, but you've just got back from Belem, right?
Yes, I got home yesterday in the evening after 9 intense days in Belem.
Fantastic. And can you give us a bit of a flavour of what it was like on the ground there, other than, very humid and stormy?
I hope I can put in words because it's quite a unique experience being a COP in my own country and in a place where we implement programs. I think it's more than a COP. It's almost, I was telling my friend that COP last week was a state of mind for me because we had in between meetings, I was meeting friends, I was watching the river. So it was quite an unique experience. And in the meanwhile, of course, we had the news about TFFF, about announcements. I think we still have some days in front of us where we hear more about the negotiations. Yeah, so it sounds like it's been super busy and that isn't going to slow down at all. And we can dive into what you've been up to and what you've got planned. But before we do that, I should probably take a step back and let you introduce IDH to our listeners who might not have heard of your team. Yeah, sure. So IDH is a global foundation with the headquarters in the Netherlands. We work with agriculture markets around the world. So we have programs in palm oil, coffee, cocoa. Here in Brazil, we have a big program on cattle, soy, agroecological cotton in many regions of the country. We are supporting agriculture value chains to provide better livelihoods and promote the conservation of the planet. So a lot to do with the discussions that are happening there right now.
Got it. And how exactly have you been participating in the COP this year? As we've touched on, there's a really big focus on agriculture, on the just transition. The presidency team are really using the language of the economic transition, the people-centric transition. So with all of that going on, how have you been focusing your interest during this COP?
I think first I gotta say there is more than one COP. I think there are several different COPs happening at the same time. First one, and it's the official one, I would say, is the COP that is happening in the Blue Zone, which is where the negotiations happen. As IDH, we are accredited by UNFCCC as observers, which means we can get into the Blue Zone, where these negotiations happen, but we're not part of the process. People who are there, they are representing, like they're official representing their countries, appointed by the Ministry of Environment and Climate, appointed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As a civil society organizations, we are there, but we are outside these negotiation rooms, in the pavilions, joining panels, meeting with people, like with official representatives who are there. So this is one of the COPs that we see. And in the meanwhile, we get to see Al Gore, Marina Silva, and all these big figures rushing between one panel to the other. So we kind of feel the vibe, but we participate in a different way. There are lots of pavilions from all the countries: Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, China. Of course, we all missed US this year. And then in Belem, we had the green zone, which was a fantastic evening. Outside the blue zone, you don't need a badge. It's mainly occupied by civil society organizations, but we also saw families there joining meetings. And this is a place for everybody who wants to take part and understand what's happening during COP. But Belem, and this was my first COP, but Belem, and this I heard from everybody, was quite unique because you had venues everywhere. So there were houses where discussions were happening. So you could feel the vibe in the whole city. And also there was the People's Summit, which was another COP as well, where you had indigenous people, social movements. They were all there gathered to discuss issues that are relevant for the negotiations, but in a different way, more inclusive, connected with, grassroots movements. It's by the river, so you had Greenpeace's, the mythological rainbow warrior there in front of the university where indigenous people were. So it's it's a very diverse and inclusive COP. As IDH, we were inside the blue zone, having meetings, bilaterals with representatives from the government, civil society, but we could also join these other venues and watch, action happening in many different places. And as observers, of course, we are interested in pushing the agenda specifically for agriculture in these negotiations. Agriculture is a super relevant topic, and its importance is growing year after year, not just because of its role with mitigation, but also because it needs to adapt, and adaptation is one of the main topics this year. So, I think this is our main role there, to showcase what's already happening, find good examples, to make sure that, we can move forward and include solutions in the negotiations as well.
I find it fascinating that you say, there are several COPs going on at one time, because you feel like it has to be the case, with like thousands of people there, that you have to sort of plan your agenda really, really carefully and focus on what you want to do on a given day.
Yeah, it's not a simple task. And sometimes you plan for the day, so you organize your agenda, and then you bump into someone who's really relevant for your work, and then you have to change everything. So it's a vivid and live thing that you never know how your day is going to end.
No, I can completely understand that. And you've mentioned that there are several different COPs happening now for Climate COP, but also some people might not be aware that the UN doesn't just run a Climate COP. It also runs biodiversity COPs and COPs on land use and desertification. And it seems from what I'm seeing that pretty much everyone that's there this year understands that these COPs need to be better joined up, because the solutions and the issues all overlap with each other. So have you been seeing this? And if so, what do you think could be done to keep making, agriculture and nature and bioeconomy a part of all of these COPs?
Yeah, and I think I've seen this in very concretely. I'll give you an example. Last week, we had a meeting with the CEO of a large coffee company. And they already know that if in 10 years we don't do anything, we may not have good quality coffee to drink every day as we usually do. And this means that we have smallholders around the world producing coffee who will lose their income. It's not just about not having coffee every day for breakfast, but it's also the lives of the people. So this means that a lot of people will lose their jobs. A lot of people what will happen to the land that is now producing coffee. Economically, we're talking about income for many countries that rely on coffee. And this wasn't something that was being discussed a couple of years ago. So it's becoming more and more concrete. This is why we have to bring this agenda together. It's not just about finding where the negotiations will put the dot in the world file. It's more about what concrete actions can we do and we should be doing already to avoid a worst impact of climate change in our activities in our lives. So what I saw there, it's that indigenous people are being part of the negotiations. I think this is the first COP where we have, I think I heard something like 900 indigenous people in the Bloom Zone. We saw protests happening there, which didn't happen for a while in a COP. Last Saturday, there was the March for the Climate, 70,000 people on the streets marching together to, fight the lobby of the fossil fuel industry, to fight for better rights for people who are occupying lands, not just in Brazil, but in Latin America and other countries. So I really think that what I saw there is a COP that is bringing all the topics together, and that we can finally see that climate, it's not just climate, it's also people, it's also about promoting a just transition, it's also gender. And you could see there, everybody who is there can see that like happening in real time.
Yeah, it's what they've said, things like the Action COP or the COP of Truth, etc. And you've already mentioned that COPs are like a really good forum for organisations like IDH to showcase what's already been happening and what's working and how that could be scaled up. So we'll have a lot of listeners that are looking at how to make their supply chains more resilient, more sustainable, to better consider, as you say, the people whose livelihoods depend on this and manage risk. So it'd be great to hear about some of that great work that is already going on.
Yeah, sure. I will give you two examples in Brazil. We have a very relevant program in the semi-arid region of the country to support smallholders who are producing agroecological cotton. And semi-arid region is one that will be the most affected by climate change because of the drought. So when we are there, we have to make sure that we have enough funds, for example, to provide finance for producers to diversify their production and to build a more resilient landscape. We need to connect with knowledge, because we need to understand what kind of KPIs we'll have to understand if this landscape is moving towards a more resilient future. And then this is taking part in the conversation. So it's all about making sure that knowledge and technology is finding its way to get on the ground and that people can really use this, to make sure that we have enough finance. Finance is a very relevant topic for this COP. The report From Baku to Belem was launched, where we have to find $1.3 trillion to finance the transition in developing world. So this is one of the examples. Another example, for example, and I think agriculture is super important, because when you mitigate, the emissions in agriculture, you also adapt. And adaptation is one of the relevant topics this year as well. We have in Brazil nowadays more than 60 million hectares of degraded pasture, which means that this is land that is with low productivity, not providing enough income, that could be producing a lot more food than it is. So we need a combination of public policy to make sure that we are attracting investors and technology to promote the conversion of degraded pasture into more productive land. And when we do this, we are not just promoting carbon removals from the atmosphere, but we're also building more resilient landscapes. But then we need public policy, we need the private sector, we need companies who want like a more resilient supply chain to invest in these places. So if a big company producing coffee, I don't want to say names, if they want to still exist in 10 years, they will need to invest in the development of more resilient coffee production. So it's a lot about doing this connection, about policies, about companies' practices, about funds that are available to make sure that they're really going where they should be.
Got it. And you've mentioned some of the things that do come out of side agreements at COPs, additional funding, nations working together on new policies or new frameworks. But I wanted to get your view on whether there was anything else specifically you'd like to see coming out of the COP, whether that is in the text, whether that is in a side agreement, or whether that is just something that you say happens on the sidelines and sort of builds an energy that keeps going. So what is your sort of COP wish list?
That's not an easy one, because I think one of my wishes for COP already happened, which is, we have a saying in Brazil that when everybody's talking about something, we say that it's in the mouth of the people. And I think it's the first time that I really see people who are not connected with this agenda talking about climate change like massively. So I think this is one of the goals of having a COP in a city that it's in the Amazon, and where people who are living there, they already feel the impact of climate change, and then they see the world traveling there to discuss the topic. And then you see that there is a huge increase in youth and people who are not connected with this agenda. They are now concerned, they're now worried, and they know that there is something you can do about it. So this is one milestone that was reached for certain. But another one, I think, and this is, I think, the main discussion that's happening there, it's how we'll close the emissions gap. So 10 years ago in Paris was agreed that we had to, we had like a threshold on emissions if you wanted to make sure that the world wouldn't surpass the 1.5 degree temperature on average. And each country, they have to submit their NDCs, their national determined contribution, which is how much they will contribute for the whole world not to, not to emit that. But when you consider what is required not to reach 1.5 degrees and what countries are committing, there is a gap, and we need to close this gap. And we don't know how to get there yet. And this is what's happening right now in the conversations as we speak. So I really hope that by the end of this week, we find a way of aligning and countries building bold commitments to make sure that we'll close this emission gap. Otherwise, in 1 year, we'll have to go back and discuss again what countries should do. One of my wishes for this COP already happened. The other, I hope in a couple of days, we'll have good news about it. And for Brazil specifically, I think the country prepared in the past few months the TFFF, which is the Tropical Forest Forever facility that will provide funds for countries that have large areas of forest, tropical forests in their land. So, and this was launched last Saturday, and this is a big news, not just for Brazil, but also for Indonesia and other countries. And we have Norway committing with 3 billion euros for this fund, and I think we'll have some announcements in the coming days. This is also great news. But it's the COP. Everybody there was saying this is the COP of truth. I don't know what this means actually. Let's say this is the COP of implementation. And implementation means that we're not working on stage. It's not a high-level discussion. Implementation means work on the ground. So we cannot expect glamour coming out from this. We have to expect that people will go out there willing to work, willing to implement. And this requires time, this requires patience, this requires confidence that we'll get there. So I think we all need to leave this COP30 considering that it's the start point. It's just the beginning. I learned the other day that in Rotterdam, people, it's a city that it's famous for people working hard. So when you buy a shirt there, your leaves are already up, which means that you're already ready to do your work. I hope everybody leaves COP with the leaves of their shirts already up, ready to do the hard work.
Got it. The good news is that we do still have time for additional Tropical Forest Forever facility finance, and we do still have some options on the table to try and close that NDC ambition and alignment gap like now to get it over and done with this year. So I have my fingers crossed that we see that in the coming days. But Manuela, for today, thank you so much for making the time to come on COP30 Covered.
Thank you, Sarah.
A big thank you once again to Manuela for her time. And that's almost everything for today. And you'll actually not be hearing from us personally tomorrow. That's Thursday, 20th November on this show. We're being taken over by the team at Springwise, who you'll have heard throughout this series. So they're going to be hosting for the day with special interviews about the potential climate harms or helps offered by AI. So this is the first COP where AI has been on the thematic agenda. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to get people that know a little bit more about digital innovation involved than ourselves. So an exciting episode lined up tomorrow. They'll also be bringing you all the news in brief from Belem, including an explainer of any additional draft text which may or may not have emerged by the time they come to sit down in the studio. In the meantime, you can check out all of our written COP coverage on our website, edie.net. Also there you can find our AI and ESG series if you want a primer on tomorrow's discussion. So we've got a day off tomorrow, Matt. Are you looking forward to it?
I am. I mean, I'm going to be at our Leaders Forum, our COP30 Leaders Forum in London. So it's not so much a day off for me. There's going to be lots of conversations, live feed as well. So it's going to be nice to just be able to absorb the information and what's happening and not immediately go, oh, I've now got to write that for our members. So in that sense, it's going to be nice, but I think it'll probably be an even later finish for me because I don't think I'm going to be getting home till late.
No, we know what, sustainability professionals are like, and that they could talk about this sort of thing and theorise about COP reform or particular roadmaps until the small hours of the morning. So, yeah. Matt, I'll let you get some rest ready ahead of that and get your notes ready. So for today's episode, it is a goodbye from Matt.
Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye from me. Goodbye.